there is a ghost hiding beneath the sands of North Africa. We see the Sahara today as the ultimate wasteland. Millions of square miles of sun-bleached rock and dunes where almost nothing can survive. But the sand is lying to you. If you could strip away just the top layer of this desert, you wouldn't find an ancient emptiness. You would find the fossilized roots of giant trees. You would find the bones of hippos, crocodiles, and elephants. You would find the remnants of a massive network of rivers and mega lakes that once rivaled the size of the Great Lakes in North America. Just 11,000 years ago, this wasn't a desert at all. It was a lush green paradise. But then, in a geological blink of an eye, the water vanished, the forests turned to dust, and the greatest garden on Earth died. The question that haunts scientists isn't just why it happened, but whether we might have been the ones who pulled the trigger. To understand the scale of this transformation, we have to look back to a time known as the African Humid Period. This wasn't a brief anomaly. It was an era where the Sahara was a vibrant mosaic of swamps, savannas, and wooded hills. The catalyst for this lush period was celestial. It came down to a phenomenon called orbital forcing. Earth does not orbit the sun in a perfect static circle. Over cycles of roughly 20,000 years, the planet wobbles on its axis like a spinning top that is losing speed. Around 10,000 years ago, Earth's axial tilt was slightly different than it is today, roughly 24.1 degrees compared to our current 23.5 degrees. That tiny fraction of a degree changed everything. It increased the amount of solar radiation hitting the northern hemisphere during the summer months. This intense heating of the land created a massive low-pressure system over North Africa, which acted like a magnet for moisture. It pulled the heavy, rain-laden monsoon winds up from the Atlantic Ocean and dumped them directly onto the desert. The result was a green explosion. Lake Mega Chad, a massive inland sea, spanned over 400,000 square kilometers, larger than the modern Caspian Sea. It was a world of fishermen and hunters, a cradle of life that seemed eternal. But orbital cycles are relentless. As the wobble corrected itself, the rains began to retreat south. A drying trend was inevitable. However, the geological record reveals a disturbing detail. In many regions, the transition from green to yellow wasn't a slow, multi-millennial fade. It was a collapse. The landscape dried out with shocking speed, much faster than the slow shift in orbit can explain. This discrepancy has led researchers to a controversial and fascinating hypothesis that humans helped break the Sahara. By 8,000 years ago, pastoralist tribes were moving across the savanna. As the rains became slightly less predictable, these early societies shifted from hunting and gathering to herding domesticated livestock, primarily cattle and goats. This shift might have been the tipping point. The theory suggests that extensive grazing by these herds stripped the land of its natural ground cover. Vegetation plays a crucial role in a climate system. It absorbs sunlight and releases moisture back into the atmosphere through transpiration, which helps form clouds. It also darkens the surface of the earth. When the animals ate the grass and the humans burned the scrub for land management, they exposed the bright, sandy earth beneath. This increased the land's albedo, or reflectivity. The bare ground reflected more sunlight back into the atmosphere, heating the air and reducing the formation of clouds. It became a feedback loop of destruction. Less grass meant less moisture. Less moisture meant less rain. Less rain meant less grass. While the shifting orbit loaded the gun, humans and their livestock may have pulled the trigger, accelerating a natural process into an ecological disaster that wiped out the green landscape in a matter of centuries. As the lakes evaporated and the great rivers turned to dry wadis, the Green Sahara began to die. Most human populations fled, retreating to the banks of the Nile or the Mediterranean coast. But one civilization refused to run. They stayed in the heart of the deepening sand and did something that should have been impossible. They built an empire. These were the Garamantes. For a long time, historians dismissed them as simple desert nomads, barbarians on the edge of the Roman world. But modern archaeology, utilizing satellite imagery and ground-penetrating radar, has revealed that the Garamantes were actually an advanced urban civilization. Their capital, Garama, wasn't a tent city. It was a fortress of stone with a thriving population. But how did they survive in a region that had become one of the driest places on Earth? They realized that while the surface water was gone, the memory of the rain remained. Trapped deep beneath the sandstone bedrock were vast aquifers, massive reserves of fossil water that had seeped into the ground during the humid period. To access it, the Garamantes engineered a brilliant system of underground irrigation tunnels called fogaras. These weren't simple wells. They were horizontal tunnels, sometimes stretching for miles, dug at a precise, slight angle into the slopes of hills or plateaus. They tapped into the water table and used gravity to channel the water down to the valleys where their cities lay. It was a feat of hydraulic engineering that rivaled the aqueducts of Rome. Because the water flowed underground, it didn't evaporate in the blistering sun. This constant supply allowed them to cultivate wheat, grapes, figs, and barley in the middle of the desert. They built a kingdom on borrowed time. Fossil water is a non-renewable resource. It does not recharge. Over centuries of intensive farming, the Garamantes drained the ancient aquifers. The water table dropped below the level of their tunnels. The fields withered, the population crashed, and the sand reclaimed their cities. They serve as a stark warning. Technology can buy you time against the climate, but it cannot buy you eternity. Before the desert took over completely, however, the Green Sahara was a place of profound intellectual innovation. Deep in the Nubian desert of southern Egypt, about 100 kilometers west of Abu Simbel, lies a site that rewrites the history of astronomy. Nabta Playa, discovered in the 1970s by a team of archaeologists, this site contains a circle of standing stones. At first glance, it looks like a rougher, smaller version of Stonehenge, but appearances are deceiving. Radiocarbon dating reveals that Nabta Playa was built roughly 7,000 years ago, more than a millennium before Stonehenge, and thousands of years before the pyramids of Giza. It is likely the oldest astronomical observatory ever found on Earth. The people who built it were cattle herders living on the edge of the monsoon belt. In a world where the seasons governed survival, they needed to know exactly when the rains would return. They didn't have calendars or apps, they had the sky. They dragged massive stones across the savannah to construct a celestial clock. The stones are aligned with terrifying precision. One axis lines up perfectly with the rising sun of the summer solstice, the longest day of the year, which signaled the coming of the monsoons. Other alignments track the movement of bright stars like Sirius, Arcturus, and the belt of Orion. This discovery shattered the old assumption that complex astronomy was the invention of the great river civilizations like Mesopotamia or the Nile Valley. It proves that sophisticated science began out here in the open plains. The complex social organization required to build Nabta Playa suggests that the roots of Egyptian civilization itself might lie in these lost cultures of the Green Sahara who moved to the Nile only after their paradise dried up. What makes Nabta Playa even more fascinating is that it isn't an isolated case. It seems that as humanity began to settle during the Neolithic era, we felt a universal compulsion to imprint the geometry of the heavens onto the earth. Across the globe, ancient cultures were building similar circular monuments. In Peru, at the site of Sechin Bajo, archaeologists have found a circular stone plaza dating back 5,500 years, one of the oldest structures in the Americas. In Denmark, recently discovered wood henges show that northern clans were gathering in massive timber circles for rituals. In the deserts of Oman and Saudi Arabia, the landscape is dotted with thousands of stone structures known as mustatils and circular tombs, many visible only from the air. These works of the old men, as the Bedouin call them, point to a global human obsession with the circle, a shape that mimics the sun, the moon, and the cycle of the seasons. It was humanity's first attempt to create order out of chaos, a way to anchor their societies to the reliable movements of the stars. Today, the Green Sahara is a memory. The Garamantes are dust, and the stones of Nabta Playa sit silent in the heat. The aquifers that once fed the Great Lakes are largely tapped out or buried too deep to reach. But the life that once thrived there isn't entirely dead. It is merely sleeping. In rare years, when freak weather patterns bring heavy, sustained rain to the desert, a phenomenon known as a superbloom occurs. Seeds that have lain dormant in the dust for decades, protected by thick coats, sense the moisture. In an explosion of life, the most hostile landscapes on Earth, from the Sahara to the Atacama, are carpeted in waves of purple, yellow, and green flowers. It is a stunning, fleeting reminder of what this place once was. It proves that the biological memory of the Green Sahara still exists in the soil. These blooms and the ruins hiding in the sand are more than just curiosities. They are Lessons. They remind us that the Earth is dynamic. Climates shift, monsoons fail, and lush gardens turn to deserts. The story of the Green Sahara is a story of adaptation, of how we survive when the world changes around us, and a reminder that even the most enduring empires are ultimately at the mercy of the water beneath their feet and the sun above their heads. If you want to support more deep dives into the lost chapters of human history, make sure to like and subscribe. See you in the next one.